Welcome back to Class Act, Updates in Education Law. I'm Lisa.
I'm Miriam.
And we are attorneys at Walter Haverfield in Cleveland, Ohio. We practice school law, and every few weeks we get together to talk about the most recent legal developments in education that are relevant to schools, school boards, administrators, teachers, really anyone who works in education.
Welcome back, everyone. Last time we started talking about Title IX, an important law that prohibits discrimination based on sex and has many ramifications for colleges, universities, as well as K-12 school districts. We had last time with us Ben Chojnacki from Walter Haverfield, and Ben is here with us again today. Welcome back, Ben.
Welcome back.
Happy to be back.
We are going to continue our discussion and touch upon some of the more controversial issues in Title IX. So today we will be talking about sexual violence and harassment, and these areas might be triggering for some people, and if that's something that you should take into consideration if you're listening to this podcast with children in your car.
Yes, that's good advice. So Ben, let's just dive into what are some of the areas of controversy in this area. I know there's been some OCR guidance withdrawn. I think we mentioned that in our last episode with this new administration. But let's kind of dive into why that's such a big deal and how this kind of stands currently.
Sure. So the big area of controversy is in the institution's obligations and their responses to incidences of sexual violence, sexual harassment. The law was the law has been the law, but you have different policy regulations that have governed how or instructed how institutions might want to or should be complying with the requirements of Title IX for the purposes of response to sexual violence. This is a big deal because so the two major ones are sexual violence and transgender issues.
Right.
And so
I think that all of this kind of started when colleges and universities, I don't know when you would say this was, maybe in the early 2000s, maybe there was a lot of concerns that not only were there rapes going on college campuses, but that when a victim would report a rape, she would be treated poorly. She would be discriminated against, and the violence that she reported would not be followed up on, and the perpetrator basically would just get away with it. Is that kind of...
Yeah, so big picture, what we're dealing with is a policy decision by the Department of Education recognizing that the atmosphere in the educational context was such that it did not encourage victims to come forward and report the crime or violate or act or harassment that they've been subject to. And that was for a number of different reasons. But the idea that the Department of Education attempted to accomplish that, to curb the chilling effect of reporting, was to articulate some guidance in 2011 that allowed for a more, we'll call it a friendly, or encouraged a friendly response and investigation that was victim-centered as opposed to a traditional investigation that carries with it some criminal components.
So wait a sec, so just for our audience, how does this relate to Title IX? How does this have anything to do with Title IX?
So Title IX prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex.
Okay.
And so the general theory and the general idea is that an institution who does not respond to an act of sexual violence, which occurs because of sex,
right,
is a response that has a disproportionate or a discriminatory effect on the victim's ability to attain her education or his education.
And we kind of started talking about that last time when we discussed the Davis versus Monroe Supreme Court case, which found that sexual harassment, and of course sexual violence is an extreme form of sexual harassment. So the Supreme Court found that sexual harassment is actionable. People can sue for that, for sexual harassment under Title IX, because institutions that are deliberately indifferent to claims of sexual harassment end up discriminating against their victims, against the victims of that harassment based on their sex. Is that the general theory? Did I articulate that well?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So Can you articulate kind of how this has developed into such controversy? Like on the face of what we just explained, you would think that most people would want victims to be able to report and would be in favor of this type of guidance, but the guidance has been withdrawn, right?
Correct. So let's start with in 2011, the Office of Civil Rights issued a Dear Colleague letter that provided guidance to universities, school district that was an attempt to curb that caustic culture around sexual harassment, sexual violence.
Can you explain, are we actually talking about rape here? Is this a criminal investigation? What are these university investigations?
So universities and school districts, we are talking about rape, and we are talking about other instances of sexual violence, sexual assault, and assault more generally. So as a school district, as a university, you are subject to the criminal laws of your jurisdiction.
Sure.
Those criminal laws prohibit rape, prohibit sexual harassment, prohibit sexual assault.
Right.
So separate from your obligations, which you have under Title IX, to provide for a discrimination-free educational environment.
Right.
There is a parallel obligation to address criminal matters, and that's something that should be done through the police and something that should be done through the prosecutor's office.
But that's a separate situation.
Right, so that your phrase parallel is really, really key for our school districts, where I really want to point out that even if you have an incident that is reported to police, there's criminal charges, criminal investigation, districts still have a responsibility to investigate
separately,
but almost simultaneously. Often districts kind of stop their process because the criminal stuff is going on, and that can be problematic because then they aren't fulfilling their responsibilities to move through that process, especially when they know of something that would trigger an investigation.
So I just want to clarify, in a criminal investigation, the outcome, if the perpetrator is found to be guilty, the outcome would be imprisonment, a jail sentence. In a university or in a school district investigation, what's the ultimate punishment? You're not going to, there's no prison.
Correct. So you're kind of looking at two different issues there. You're looking at the accused potential violation of your student code of conduct or your rules and regulations. So that is a disciplinary action in and of itself.
Like suspension,
expulsion, things like that. Separate from that, you have the Title IX obligation to provide for the educational opportunities and benefit of the victim.
Okay.
And so one of the problems that you'll run into, especially if there is a serious matter that it triggers a criminal investigation, you're going to run into a situation where you've got a victim who, while the criminal matter is proceeding, is going to be forced to sit in a classroom potentially with the assailant.
Right.
And you can't really learn in that context.
Right.
So
OCR has been previously pretty sympathetic to that position of the victim, right?
And I think that's the guidance that Ben started talking about, that in 2011, OCR issued guidance directing school districts and universities into how to conduct these investigations with a focus on the victim, with a sensitivity towards the victim. And some people thought I went overboard, but let me let you talk a little bit more about that.
What you have is a response to this concern over the educational environment in 2010. The Obama administration's OCR issued a Dear Colleague letter that set forth some pretty clear guidance for how investigations into allegations of sexual violence, sexual assault are to be handled by an institution. And those speak to both the procedural hearing process and the obligations of an investigation.
Okay.
So like we talked about, while this is going on and the incidents that lead to the procedure for how you go about investigating, that Davis case that we talked about previously.
Davis versus Monroe, yep.
That case still exists, and so you've got your deliberate indifference standard that you need to be cognizant of as a school district or as a university. And then paired with that, the 2011 letter essentially says that once you're into that investigation standard, when you're evaluating whether your code of conduct or an incident has occurred, they apply this preponderance of the evidence standard that says it's more likely than not for an incident to have occurred.
So let's talk about that, the evidence standard. So in a criminal context, I'm sure everybody who watches Law and Order or any criminal show is that we are all familiar with beyond a reasonable doubt. So in a criminal context, in order to convict somebody, his or her guilt has to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt, which is a fairly high standard, but that makes sense because the punishment is that you're depriving them of their freedom, of their liberty. Right. And there are other standards, right? So
Correct.
There's the preponderance of the evidence standard.
There's the clear and convincing standard.
And then there's the clear, so preponderance of the evidence standard is basically more likely than not. Am I correct? More
Yes.
likely than not.
More
So like
probable than not.
this is, did this happen? It's more likely than not that this did take place. So like a 51 to 49% likelihood. That would meet the criteria of probable cause.
So as your fact finder, the burden that you have to figure out if something happened is much lower than what it would be in a criminal context.
Okay, and then there's also a middle standard, which is the clear and convincing standard. Is that correct? And that's between preponderance of the evidence and reasonable doubt.
Correct.
So the Obama administration said to school districts and colleges, when you are looking to see if a rape took place, if a sexual assault took place, look at the lowest standard possible in deciding whether to expel this student, to suspend this student. If it's more likely than not, then that it took place, then there's guilt. Then there's a finding of guilt. Is that correct?
That is correct. And the devil's a little bit in the details there because, again, a Dear Colleague letter like this one, although it's been withdrawn, at the time it was in effect, it did not have the force of law. It was guidance.
Okay.
And so the guidance from the Office of Civil Rights was that you should be handling these matters through using a preponderance of the evidence standard.
Okay.
And that is not necessarily consistent with what courts have held the standard should be.
Oh, interesting.
But the law generally says that let me phrase this appropriately. The standard that the Office of Civil Rights is suggesting or mandating that an institution or a school board apply in these situations does not have the effect of law.
Okay.
So an institution could exercise its discretion and not follow that standard. Okay. Although it would be likely that you're going to be found to be in violation of the OCR's internal policies and you're going to be subject to some discipline. This is all, again, subject to the caveat that we're talking about something that's been rescinded in the last couple of years.